Hello again, BookTube. I come to you once again with yet another Friday Reads. I have recently finished Diarmaid MacCulloch's Reformation, Europe's House Divided, and it is every bit as spectacular as I remember it being when I first started reading it earlier this year. In fact, I take back what I said in my earlier video when I complained that I was missing some of MacCulloch's wit and some of the dry humour that I was really getting from his other book on the first 3,000 years of Christianity. Now, having read this book, or 700 pages of it, or thereabouts, I can now say that I was wrong and that I have actually mischaracterized this book rather seriously because it is full of the wry humour and the wit and the wisecracks that I remember enjoying in his other book on Christianity. And obviously, perhaps the passage of time had caused my knowledge of this text to erode somewhat. It is really a joyful and thrilling reading experience. I learned about all sorts of quirky and obscure aspects of Reformation history that I otherwise would not have known about. Just to give you an example, the Greek adventurer, I believe his name was Heraclides, who seized power in Moldavia and made himself the absolute ruler of the country and sought to impose upon it an extreme form of Calvinism, much to the disgust of the native population, who were Orthodox and Lutheran in their sentiments, and who responded by violently overthrowing him and having him killed. I really did not know anything about Southeast Europe's flirtation with Protestant ideas. I found out all sorts of things about the workings of the Counter-Reformation, the ways in which Protestants and Catholics in the aftermath of the Reformation essentially competed to see who could be tougher on immorality, on sin, and that led to an intensification of the persecution mania that had already been present in Christian society for some time before the Reformation. And reading this book, I can't help but share MacCulloch's sense of sadness that the more moderate course of Erasmus was not taken, and that instead Europe was plunged into this bloodbath of these competing sects, all fighting for domination. Now, one thing I particularly enjoyed about this book was the way in which MacCulloch shed light on the intra-Protestant divisions between Calvinist and Lutheran, especially on the issue of the Eucharist, and the ways in which these divisions played out in terms of the geopolitics of Europe. It was very interesting to read that for many Lutherans, Calvinism was so extreme that they actually preferred Catholicism. Uh, this is, of course, something that would be new to those hardcore Protestants who are used to seeing Catholics as being the embodiment of everything that is wrong or that is perverted in what calls itself official Christianity. And yet, back in the Reformation period, there were a great many Protestants who disagreed so bitterly with their fellow Protestants that they were willing to actually make a bid with the so-called harlot of Rome against their Protestant rivals. MacCulloch also goes into great detail about the direction that each country within Europe took, especially those countries which turned Protestant, and why, for instance, Scotland had a reformation that was in many ways more thoroughgoing in its efforts to control public morality and public behaviour than was the Netherlands, even though in the Netherlands you had a society that was every bit, you could argue, as Protestant in many ways as the Scottish society was. So that was interesting to read about. And the way in which he delves into the sociology behind the Reformation, as well as the geopolitics. It's just a splendid, comprehensive one-volume account of this incredibly complex and exciting, but also deeply violent period in European history. And as you can see, I've made copious underlinings in the book. Throughout the book, I have made underlinings, I have dog-eared pages, I've done all sorts, and all of this means that when I come back to it, I'm coming back to it not as a complete stranger, but as someone who has a good working knowledge of the text, and is having a conversation with MacCulloch and with the ideas that he's putting forward, and is able to quickly recognize favorite passages or things which stuck out to me for future reference. So all of that is very good to see and very useful to have. Now, having finished Reformation, I have started reading his latest book, Lower Than the Angels, A History of Sex and Christianity. Now, the idea behind the title is that tradition holds it, Christian tradition holds it, that mankind was created to be just slightly lower than the angels. And MacCulloch plays with this idea, and he asks the question, if it is the case that mankind is only slightly lower than the angels when it comes to the hierarchical organization of creation, then what is the main difference between the two? Perhaps that difference is human sexuality, that tricky thing which has caused so much controversy over so many millennia of human history. And MacCulloch in this book, which I've just started reading, goes into a lot of detail about the ways in which Christianity approached this thorny business of sex, gender, and the family, and how Christian views on this evolved over 3,000 years. And I say 3,000 years because I'm including the period when Judaism and Greek mythology and philosophy were also getting their start. And MacCulloch actually takes this idea that he was playing with in his other book, The First 3,000 Years of Christianity. And he does takes a similar approach here. He deals with ancient Greece and the ancient Jewish religion and their approaches to human sexuality and gender. And he looks at how this interacted with early Christian ideas, which were profoundly influenced by the earlier Jewish and Greek traditions. So I'm a fifth of the way through this. I'm really enjoying it. I think that MacCulloch shows himself to be every bit as thorough in his scholarship as I have come to expect from him. He has a profoundly exegetical savvy when it comes to the analysis of the key documentation, especially the key Bible texts which are being spoken about. And I expect this to be a very insightful and a very eye-opening read. So I've just started this. This is his latest book, Lower Than the Angels, A History of Sex and Christianity. So that's all I have really to report in terms of my Friday reads. I have delved a bit back into Coleridge, who I'm still struggling with. He is still eluding me somehow. The brilliance of his poetry is not captivating me, as was the case with his counterpart, Wordsworth. So I will carry on persevering with that, and I hope to be back soon with my plans for what I'm going to read over this coming month, and that should see my reading adventure through to the end of this year. So that's all from me. Bye for now, YouTube.